So I'm going to show you exactly how I get clarity inside of my mixes. Hi, welcome to Dinosaur Dog Studio. My name is Tyson. I'm a mastering engineer at Night Owl Music Group. And today we're going to be diving into clarity and how to get additional clarity inside of our mixes using one simple tool. So let's dive in. Creating clarity in your mix. The first thing I want to do is define clarity, is being able to hear each element clearly inside of the mix. So if each element is distinct that we can hear inside of the mix, then we have clarity in the mix. What am I going to cover inside of this video? The first one is what creates mud in the mix. The second thing is gestalt, which is the powerful concept behind how to create clarity, but also without sacrificing tone for our individual elements as well. We're going to talk about creating clarity with EQ, how the concept behind it actually works out in a real mixing scenario. And then we're also going to be diving into the DAW and show you in a real mixing scenario how this is done in two different examples there. So stick around to the end to make sure that you actually can see how this is done inside of the DAW itself. The first thing we're covering is mud in the mix. So this is what our mix generically looks like, right? We have three elements, and the issue is, this is great. They all look different. They all look pretty, whatever. And then we have to put all these elements inside of that box because that's the limit of our mix. And so we end up doing this, and then we can only see one of the things that we ended up putting in the mix. It's whatever's loudest, right? That's the only thing that we can hear or see. And so then we do some things like saturation, panning, whatever else, and then we end up with a mix that kind of looks like this, which is better because, okay, there's some other colors in there. I can tell that there's something else going on, but it's still very, very clear, very, very unclear because essentially what's happening is that all of these frequencies are being shared by these elements, and we're essentially creating the concept known as masking, which is when we have equal power of the same frequencies, end up not being able to hear either element, and it's just noise to us. What we want to do is actually create a mix that looks more like this, where each element has its distinct place in the mix that overall makes the picture that we're trying to show. And so as you'll notice, right, for example, the red, right, it no longer has the whole person, the whole red person in here. It just has a section of it, but it's all of a sudden more clear and it complements the entire picture better. So ultimately, this is what we're trying to do when we're creating clarity in our mix, and also a good visual representation of how this actually works. And so what I don't want you to walk away from this as, oh, I just need a high and low pass everything in my mix and have each of them belong in only one section of the mix. And the reason why that would be a very negative thing to do is you would ruin the tone of every single element in your mix and end up with a very odd sounding mix. But in the simplistic form, this is exactly how we create clarity in the mix. So that's essentially covering what creates mud in the mix. Again, it's really that masking, concept that is actually creating a lack of clarity in the mix. So let's cover gestalt and what gestalt has to do with creating clarity in our mix. So gestalt is a very broad concept in psychology that essentially says that if we remove certain elements inside of a greater system, then our brains will essentially fill in the gaps and still make meaning out of it. I have a sentence here, the cat walked over the bridge, right? If I removed all the vowels and then squish the words together, all of a sudden you can probably still read what this says. Because our brain picks up on the context of what's happening, therefore is able to make meaning even though there's missing information. The benefit is we actually use less space making this sentence, and very similar to when we're actually using it in the DAW, this concept of gestalt, we can actually remove entire frequency bands from an element and it won't be perceived as missing anything because we can still hear other parts of it and our brain inherently fills in the gaps of what's missing. That's just the basic principle of how we actually create clarity in the mix. Let's dive into actually creating clarity with EQ. How do we do this? Clarity with EQ is the assumption is all our tracks sound great individually. So before this step inside of the mix, I always ensure that I have EQ'd all of my tracks individually to sound good. Sometimes this is done before the mix even starts, because if there was, if it's just a well-produced track, it probably already has great tones and there's very little issues I need to fix other than creating relationships, which is what clarity is doing, which is what our goal is in this step of creating clarity with Pocket EQ. We're actually creating relationships between these individual elements. But the assumption is we want all of our individual tracks to already sound good individually. So let's use this example of the rhythm guitar and lead guitar. The reason is because there's a lot of shared similarities between these two elements. And so when we actually overlay these two elements together, you can actually see how much overlay there actually is. And so on the top end here, you can almost see 100% of everything is basically mud because they're so ingrained with one another that we're not able to really distinguish either element. And while the rhythm will probably stand out a little bit more because it has so much more low end, the lead is really going to get lost in this mix without just boosting it like crazy, which then obviously causes the rhythm to lose clarity. So we need to create more separation between these two elements other than with volume. Then you're probably already producing and mixing your own music. And if you're unable to get that professional sheen or quality or vibe for your songs, then I want to let you in on a little secret. Most mixers are trying to compensate their lack of professional mixes by getting more plugins, by using more advanced tips or tricks or techniques in their mixes, or relying on buying more professional gear in order to compensate for their lack of quality mixes. But in reality, most mixers' core problem is actually mixing subjectively or approaching mixing from just a creative mindset entirely. Obviously, mixing is still a somewhat of a creative skill. It's actually far more objective than most people realize. Because if we think about it, everyone agrees on what a professional mix actually is. If that weren't the case, then it would be an entirely subjective field. But in reality, mixing is actually incredibly objective because everyone agrees on what a pro song sounds like. And so mixing objectively can actually help you avoid being your own worst enemy inside of your mixes and ultimately allow you to just check all of the boxes that a professional mix should check, and then your mix will sound objectively professional. And so if you're mixing your own music and you're motivated to actually learn the objective skill of mixing, and if you want to ensure that your music sounds pro, then I would love to help you out by teaching you the 5 objective standards that everybody is judging your mix by, and how you can use objective mixing to solve those 5 problems inside of your mix, and then also how to do all of that in under 3 hours per song without pro gear, premium plugins, or utilizing templates or presets. So if this is something that piques your interest, then go to theobjectivemix.com to order my brand new book, The Objective Mix. This will teach you how to mix objectively professional mixes every single time you sit down to mix. This provides you with my entire mixing workflow, along with all of the breakthrough lessons that I've learned in the last 16 years of mixing music. So if that is interesting to you at all, then again, go to theobjectivemix.com or click the link right below this video. Can't wait to see you on the inside. With that, let's get back to the video. So when we dive in a little bit deeper though to these two elements, what we want to do is identify where these elements are already strong and weak, and therefore we can actually correct with EQ some of this stuff to be able to create space for the other element. Let me explain this a little bit more. In the rhythm guitar, we can tell the 500 hertz range is very strong, and then also the 1.8 kilohertz is very strong. And we're specifically focused on that range that has a lot of overlap already between the two elements. And then the lead guitar is actually stronger at 700 hertz and also at 2 kilohertz. So those are kind of the peaks, if you will, of these two elements. And so what we want to do with the lead guitar is actually cut at 500 and 1.8 kilohertz. If you go back here, remember that's where the rhythm guitar is strong. So we're avoiding where the lead guitar is strong, but focusing on where the rhythm guitar is strong. So we want to reduce those two elements or those two frequency bands in the lead guitar to create space for the rhythm guitar, and vice versa. For the rhythm guitar, we're going to reduce 700 hertz and 2.1 kilohertz. And these are relatively small moves. We're not making massive changes in the mix here. But what this ultimately does, so this is the before picture of what these two elements looked like. But then after this change in this mix, this is now the new overlay between these two elements. So we can see The overlap is still there. Obviously, if without that overlap, these elements are going to sound too separate and there's not going to be enough glue in the mix. So this is all about a balance between the two. But we can see here now the rhythm guitar is existing here in this orange color, and you can see even at that 1.5 kilohertz range, that rhythm guitar is now poking out, which is really nice. That's exactly what our intended target was with reducing that range with our lead guitar. And then our lead guitar obviously is existing more in that upper range, and we have very clear visual separation between the two elements. Okay, so that's creating clarity with EQ. The next one is actually using examples in the DAW so we can actually hear what this is doing for our mix. So the first example I'm going to use is the rhythm and lead guitar, the same exact one that you actually just saw. And then we're also going to be using the bass and kick because these are just some common items that have a lot of overlap that we want to be able to separate using EQ and create additional clarity inside of our mix. So let's go into the DAW. Okay, so now we have pulled up our lead guitar and our rhythms. I'm not going to go through actually creating the EQ curves because you've already seen them. So here's the rhythm, right? We've taken a little bit out of this 730 and 2.1 kilohertz, and then on the leads we've taken out at the 500 and the 1.7 kilohertz range. Right, let's just listen to it. So here's before, and pay attention, like the lead guitar is really the one that's getting lost here because there's so much just overlap from the rhythms that's overtaking it. So again, that lead guitar is really getting lost because it's a little bit further back in the mix, but the rhythms are very apparent because we can hear that low end. So it may not seem that there's really that much going on, but real quick, I want to just mute these rhythms, and then you can just hear how much more of the lead guitar there actually is than you're hearing. And in the context of the mix, you can hear it even more. So those lead guitars are really getting lost in the greater landscape of the mix, and so we really need to bring those out. Now let's listen to the after of this EQ. So I'm going to start with it, and then we're going to turn it on. So there's just that inherent separation that's causing between these two elements and really bringing out those lead guitars. So that is essentially pocket EQ in practice. So let's do one more example, and we'll actually be doing this in real time here between the bass guitar and the kick drum. So let's start over here. All right, so let's mute those two elements. All right, and then I'm gonna pull up an analyzer here just so we can kind of see what's going on here. Where are these two elements masking each other? So let's look at the bass first. So I'm seeing a lot of overlap probably in this range here. So between kind of the 60 and 125 kilohertz range. Let's look at the top end. I think we have quite a bit of separation here because this is really strong in like the 8 kilohertz range versus the bass is kind of coming out in that mid range. Yeah, more in this like kind of 2K. So on the top end, they have a lot of separation, which is allowing us to have some, clarity between the two elements, but there's definitely more we can do in the low end, which is generally the traffic jam of our mixes anyway, so that makes sense. So let's pull up a couple EQs. So that's the bass, here's the kick, And what we want to do is bring out each element again where it's strong and reduce where the other one is strong as well. So let's just start by cutting first. And so the kick was really strong. Actually, yeah, kind of like that 45 range or so. So we're gonna cut right here, about 3 decibels. And then on the kick, we're gonna cut in that 100-ish range as well. Yeah, actually, there's some more overlap on the 300 as well. So let's cut that out. All right, and then the last thing that we can do to really add some, hype into this is actually increasing the fundamentals as well of these two elements. This is a really powerful technique to be able to just further create that separation, especially in the low end here. Okay, so here is before. All right, let's listen to it in the context of the mix. Here's before. So there's obviously more to go here, but you can tell that the kick and the bass are really brought out with this because they're no longer masking one another, and we can actually create some clarity in that low end and bring everything out. So this is the process that I would go through the entire mix. Obviously, this can get very, very confusing very quickly with a large, dense mix like this one, where there's lots of different elements, and we need to create all of these relationships in between all of them. So if you want to learn how to do that, then I actually have a systematic approach for doing this inside of the Objective Mix. So if you want to go pick up that book, don't forget that is down in the description, or it's probably on a comment as well in the video. If you want to get your hands on the Objective Mix, it goes through my entire mixing process on how I get objectively professional mixes every single time I mix a song. So go ahead, check that out, and I will catch you in the next video.